This is a quick 10-minute video or less on using the DCOS universe. Now the DCOS universe allows us very easily to click and install applications. My name is Bruno Turkley. I'm an engineer at Microsoft. Feel free to reach out to me. So what we want to talk about here is how we use the DCOS universe to install applications, but not only that, how do we build our own entry into the universe should we want to do that? So once again, the universe is an easy way to install these apps with a single click. We'll demonstrate with Jenkins. And we'll also review what it would take for you to write your own package, similar to what you see with Cassandra. And of course, we can use the command line to do the same thing. We don't need to go to the GUI. We can just say DOS package install and provide the package name. Now before we get too deep into this, let's talk about one thing, and that is creating a tunnel. A tunnel is needed so we can use a browser to connect up to the master node of our cluster, because after all, that's where that dashboard exists for us to be able to actually use the universe from within a browser. We're going to have a very simple demo, and that is we're going to install Jenkins with one click. So we're going to install the universe package known as Jenkins, and then of course we're going to test that out by bringing Jenkins up to make sure it works. And again, let's review the tunnel component. There's some narration coming up here that describes all the details you need to know, but that is something you'll want to know in general when working with DCOS, the ability to tunnel into the master node and do things. One of the things that makes the browser capable from a Windows machine is a tunnel. In other words, we want to set up so that localhost really points to this management node in our DCOS cluster. So what I've done is I've set up a tunnel configuration here in PuTTY. Let's quickly review what's involved. First of all, it's Azure user @ and then it would be the domain name of my master node. And of course, we're going to route to port 2200, but we have a few other things we need to worry about here in the configuration. So we're going to click on SSH here and kind of move our way down the tree here to see how it's set up. One of the things you'll see is that we've set up the PPK file, so you might want to go and research what it takes to generate. There's a utility called PuTTYGen, which allows you to generate this PPK file from your public key, because that's the way the tunnel is leveraging security to make that secure connection. And as we keep going down over here, we're going to go over here to the tunnels configuration, and I've added a tunnel. And basically, the tunnel is saying that once in my browser I go to port 8081, it's really going to route to port 80 there on my DCOS master node endpoint, right? So I'm going to go ahead now. That's pretty much how you set up the tunnel. I'll go ahead and open it. So enough talking, let's go ahead and just open up this tunnel, and you'll see a little command window pop up indicating that the tunnel has been established. Now whenever I say localhost from my Windows machine, I'm really pointing to the master node, and that's what this is doing right now. It's basically setting up that tunnel, and as you can see, I'm in the master node of my DCOS tunnel. The tunnel is now active. I can now go to my browser to localhost 8081 because that's the port I chose in my configuration, and I ought to be able to go see the dashboard, localhost : 8081, and sure enough, there's the dashboard. And you notice in the lower left pane is the universe. So let's go ahead and access that universe here and go ahead and install Jenkins next. Notice there are a number of packages. You can add your own. Might make sense in an enterprise play, but let's go now and really install Jenkins. Jenkins is pretty much the de facto standard when doing DevOps using open source packages. Let's go ahead and install it. Takes more or less a couple seconds because after all, it is all containerized, and containers spin up very quickly. Now that it's installed here, let's go ahead under the Services tab here and see if Jenkins is indeed installing. You can see that it is deploying. It'll take just a few moments to deploy. Once it does, we can actually start leveraging Jenkins and start playing with it. So let's wait just a couple moments before that happens. Go ahead and hit Jenkins here at this point because it's running after all. And now we get into the services screen, and we can actually open that service by clicking the open service button. And sure enough, the browser indicates that Jenkins is indeed firing up, and we can start using it as though we were installing it ourselves on our own VM, except this time it's in the DCOS cluster. So notice we are welcome. This is the graphical interface that is Jenkins. We can go in here and define our new pipeline if we wish. The purpose of this video is to simply indicate that Jenkins is running. It may not be perfect, but we can probably go in and start playing with it. Let's define a pipeline, give it a name here. A pipeline is the way you define the DevOps pipeline, the steps it takes to test and deploy your app into production. Go ahead and click OK here after you've given a name to your pipeline. And then what we're going to go do essentially is type in maybe a hello world within the pipeline, just as a fun little experiment here. We're not really interested in the outcome here, more or less just to show you, to illustrate that Jenkins is up and running. This could be pretty much any package that we install through the DCOS universe. This one just happens to be Jenkins, but there are a number of other important ones, like for example Spark is another big powerful package. Go ahead and click Save. And at this point, Jenkins is kind of up and running. We're not going to spend much more time here other than just say that Jenkins is up and running. So at this point, the pipeline's been defined. You can see that it's executing here. Job number 1 is executing, that we basically said hello world. I can go view if I want, console output. But let's really turn our attention to making your own package that you may want to publish yourself in the Mesosphere universe. There's really 4 files that allow you to do this. You basically define 4 files. Let's review each of these 4 files. You have a package.json file, which is the metadata, the high-level information about the package. You have the resource, which is all the externally hosted resources, like say a Docker image. The configuration file, and this is basically the properties that the user would modify before deployment. And then finally the JSON file, it's essentially the definition. So here's the package. Notice it's a bunch of metadata here, like the name, the maintainer, email address, website, things like that are in package.json here. Let's now turn our attention to the resource.json. The resource.json is useful for a couple things here, but here you can see some of the things it's doing. It's got the images that make up, for example, the interface within the universe itself. You've got the assets here. You might want to have some logging taking place. You might want to put that. And of course, the very important here asset is the container itself that represents the application we want to deploy from the universe. And then of course the configuration file, here you have information that the user might want to reflect in an interface, like how many times to do something, the name. This is the configuration the user can specify in the web interface. And then finally the last one is the JSON file itself that defines for DCOS this running container. We've been looking at this in other videos. This is the marathon.json equivalent, the JSON markup that defines characteristics that our running application needs. So just 4 files represents everything we need to know here in this section. So we reviewed how to use the DCOS universe, and then even how to create your own packages should you desire to for some enterprise application.